Welcome to This Explainer. If you're leading a team today, you've probably faced this incredibly familiar, almost daily dilemma. Someone on your team comes to you with a problem, and well, your gut instinct as a manager is to just fix it, right? You want to help out, you want to be super efficient, and let's be honest, you probably have a pretty good idea of exactly what they should do. But as we're going to see today, jumping straight to the solution might actually be the very thing holding your team back from reaching their full potential. So today we're exploring a seriously powerful framework that's designed to completely transform how you empower your team, the GROW coaching model. And we absolutely need to talk about this right now. Why? Because global employee engagement currently sits at a startlingly low 21%. Just 21%. That means roughly 4 out of 5 people are basically just disconnected at work. The gap between where teams are and where they actually need to be is closing, but it's happening one single conversation at a time. This makes manager and leadership development a massive, urgent priority for organizations worldwide. Literally, if we don't change how we lead, we're just not going to move that needle. So what's the core of the issue? Well, it's the stark contrast between giving advice and actually coaching. The classic managerial trap is what we might call jumping to the 100% idea. You've got the expertise, so you just tell your employee what to do. Sure, it feels faster, but here's the catch. By not letting your team explore their own challenges in their own way, you completely miss what's actually holding them back. Coaching, on the other hand, means rewiring your brain. It means replacing advice giving with actively asking great questions and, listening hard, allowing your team to learn for themselves and really commit to their own action plans. Okay, let's dive right into this toolkit. Here is our roadmap. 1. The manager's coaching dilemma. 2. The GROW framework origins. 3. Goals and current reality. 4. Options and the will. 5. Active listening and remote coaching. And finally, 6. Your next one-on-one. Section 2. The GROW framework origins. Before we get into the mechanics of the actual questions, it's really helpful to understand the foundation we're building on. Where did this transformative framework actually come from? Interestingly enough, this model wasn't just dreamt up in some corporate boardroom overnight. It actually originates from the tennis court back in the 1980s, heavily influenced by Timothy Galway's inner game sports psychology methodology. The profound insight here was that performance barriers are usually internal. We're talking things like self-doubt, fear, distraction, rather than a lack of actual technical skill. In the late 80s, pioneers John Whitmore, Graham Alexander, and Alan Fine took those sports psychology principles and adapted them for the corporate world while developing programs at McKinsey. It was then officially popularized in 1992 by Whitmore's best-selling book, Coaching for Performance. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer elegance of what they built. GROW is an acronym: Goal, Reality, Options, and Way Forward, or WILL. But notice the flow here. It's a continuous, flexible cycle, not some rigid checklist. You might start assessing reality and then suddenly realize, oh wait, we actually need to go back and adjust the goal. It's a beautifully dynamic map for any meaningful coaching conversation. Section 3. Goals and Current Reality. Let's get into the actual mechanics and see how this builds, starting with the first 2 chronological steps of the framework. The goal phase is basically all about defining the destination. What does the coachee actually want to accomplish? You really need to identify 2 things here: the immediate goal for this specific, say, 30-minute conversation, and the longer-term performance goal they're striving for overall. Now, this goal has to meet the SMART criteria, meaning it needs to be specific, positively framed, and this is absolutely crucial, it must be within the coachee's actual control. Now, picture yourself sitting across from your team member. You really want to drop your pitch a bit, slow your pace, and ask things like, what do you want to achieve from this session? What does success look like for you here? Or, simply and powerfully, what do you actually want? I actually want to pause here for a second because this is deeply, deeply important. If you encounter resistance during a coaching session, the sources point out a fascinating psychological fact. Resistance usually signals that the goal isn't truly owned by the coachee. Seriously, if you set the goal for them, the whole framework just completely falls apart. They absolutely must be in the driver's seat. Okay, so once the goal is clearly owned and defined, we move on to reality. This is where you take a really honest, completely judgment-free inventory of the current situation. You're just exploring what is happening right now, identifying the gap between their current reality and their end goal. It is so vital here to resist that urge to just jump in with solutions. Right now, you are merely mapping the territory. To help them map this landscape out, you'll want to ask measured, probing questions. Describe the current situation to me. What, who, and when? What obstacles, both internal and external, do you face? And here's a really great one. What have you already tried? That one is golden because it honors their previous efforts and stops you from suggesting something they've already figured out doesn't work.
Section 4, Options and the Will. With our destinations set and the current landscape mapped out, we transition to the second half of the framework, where we brainstorm paths forward and lock in commitment.
The options phase is all about generating possibilities. You're basically helping them explore various routes to their destination. So, the crucial point here is, you, as the manager, must hold back your own answers. I know it's hard, but even if you know the exact right way to do it, your job right now is to facilitate their brainstorming, opening up their thinking, and really expanding their creativity. You draw this creativity out by asking expansive questions. Things like, what else could you do? Think of a role model you respect. What would they do in this situation? If absolutely anything were possible, what approach would you take? And perhaps the single most powerful coaching question of all, simply asking, what else? Now, brainstorming is fantastic, but without action, it's honestly just a theoretical exercise. So the final step is will, or the way forward. This is where you funnel all those abstract possibilities into concrete, trackable momentum. You're securing a clear-cut commitment to a specific action plan and confirming their readiness to actually execute it. You finalize this whole coaching contract with some strict accountability questions. What exactly is your next step? When, specifically, are you going to start? And here is a fantastic tool straight from the sources. On a scale of 1 to 10, how committed are you to doing it? If they say a 7, you simply ask, well, what would it take to make it a 10? Section 5, Active Listening and Remote Coaching. Now that we know the 4 steps, we have to look at the delivery, because applying this framework in the real world means nuance matters. First off, let's talk about the spaces between those 4 letters. The sources highlight this wonderful bridge metaphor. At the end of each stage, say you're moving from goal over to reality, you should actively summarize the important points of what you just heard. This ensures your employee truly feels heard, it builds deep trust, and it acts as a smooth, natural bridge to keep the whole conversation perfectly on track. But how does this all work if your team isn't even in the same room? Remote coaching definitely requires some specific adaptations. You see, in-office coaching often happens organically, but remote coaching, that has to be protected. You need to block dedicated time. Keep your video on because you absolutely need to read those nonverbal cues. Audit yourself for proximity bias to make sure your remote workers get the exact same coaching frequency as your in-office peers. And to combat screen fatigue, try using shorter, punchier 20 to 30-minute check-ins, focusing on just one phase or one specific goal. Now, what's really interesting here is how Grow stacks up against other models out there. While Oscar is fantastic for strengths-based coaching, Clear is deep and time-intensive for super complex issues, and Fuel is highly structured for performance feedback, Grow really remains the ultimate versatile baseline. It's hands down the easiest to learn and the most adaptable for everyday managerial conversations, covering everything from career development to quick problem solving. Section 6, your next one-on-one. We've covered the origins, the 4 steps, the questions to ask, and how to deploy all this in a modern, remote environment. Now it's time to pivot from theory to your immediate reality. The Grow model works so well because it forces us right out of our comfort zones. It transforms us from the manager who just dictates into the leader who truly empowers. It puts your team right in the driver's seat of their own development. So, think about the next time an employee walks into your office or pops up on your screen with a problem. Are you going to just give them the 100% idea again? Or what will you ask in your next one-on-one?